Well, Les, thanks for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation. As I mentioned in the intro, you and I have had the privilege of connecting over the last several months. I've been a follower of your work for a long time, and just really grateful that in the middle of a pandemic, when we're all figuring out what does it look like to lead our organizations in the middle of this madness, just really grateful for your voice. And I want to dig into that today. But before we kind of get into what does this all mean for us in today's climate, I'd love for you to give everybody a little bit of the backstory of predictable success and just a quick brief overview. Everybody can go do their homework to really understand the model more, but if you give a quick overview of predictable success and just to help kind of catch us up as we dive into this together.
Sure. Well, just real quick on the background of it so that everybody has some idea of the context of what we're talking about. How I got to this point is that I started out as a serial entrepreneur, though we didn't have that terminology back then. I originally qualified as the UK equivalent of a CPA, chartered accountant. And I was just engrossed with initially businesses, and over time became more just organizations in general, whether for-profit or not-for-profit. But I spent about 12 years serially being involved in the launch and growth of successive businesses. And before I was 35, I'd helped 42 businesses launch. And, you know, even a dumb Irishman, and that's what I am, as you gather from my accent, can't help but notice some recurring patterns over time.
Sure.
And that's really what predictable success is. I've then since then spent 30 years codifying predictable success as a really just a recognition of what actually happens. You know, I didn't make anything up. There's nothing academic in the model. I just kept seeing these patterns and testing them out.
Sure.
And I moved over here to the US 20 years ago because I had worked with organizations all the way up a growth curve that we're going to talk about in a second or two, but I hadn't worked with very large organizations, you know, Fortune 500 businesses,
right?
Not in the context of proving out the model. And I had a remarkable opportunity just because of some connections that I had on the West Coast. I moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area, and I spent from about 1997 to about 2005 with just a remarkable slate of large organizations: Microsoft, T-Mobile, American Express, the US Army, Sun Microsystems. And the model proved itself out. What I thought was bound to be happening in those organizations was.
Sure.
And so I finished the model off, and we ended up with what we're here to talk about today, which is predictable success, a 7-stage model for the growth and sadly often decline of organizations, whether for-profit or not-for-profit.
Yeah. I think I first was introduced to your work it was a handful of years ago by our mutual friend, Casey Graham, is the first one who put one of your books in my hands. And what I found was that every time I was consulting or coaching with a leader or an organization, I found myself coming back and referencing your work, and just, you know, that there's these stages and there's such predictable patterns that happen in organizations. And so, of course, then I dove a ton deeper in understanding the model and doing the licensed practitioner program. But give everybody a quick look at those 7 stages, just to set context for us.
I'm going to just screen share for a little bit, and you don't have to look now for a while at my tonsorial challenges, which we're all having. So let's talk through the 7 stages that we've just mentioned. And as folks will be able to see, and Jenny, you maybe give me a heads up that you're seeing this okay.
Yep.
We have basically an upturn curve. And so on the left side of this life cycle, we have the 3 stages that I call the growth stages. And by the way, the URL at the bottom here allows people to go take a free quiz. You can go work out what your own where you are in this life cycle, but you can take the time to do that when we're finished. And the 3 growth stages on the left side here are, first of all, early struggle, and it's what's sometimes called the startup mode. It's essentially a 3-year period for most organizations, gross over exaggeration, but it typically is about a 3-year period during which we're basically trying to find our feet. We're trying to find our market. If we're for-profit business, we're trying to find a profitable, sustainable market. And if it's a cause-based, faith-based organization, new church, we're just trying to find our tribe, trying to find our congregation. We're trying to get, acceptance. Massive degree of what would I say, mortality in early struggle. There's about an 80% failure rate. 1 in 5 get through, and we hit the stage that I call fun. And that's what fun is. It's the stage whenever we're having fun. We think this is what we were here to do. This is what I'm here to do. And most people who get their organization to this point, by the way, they think that's it. That's
right. Yeah, we've arrived.
I've made it. And as you can see, we're only 2/7 of the way through all of the potential things. That's one important And you can stay in fun for as long as you want. You need to make some conscious choices, which we might talk about in a moment or two. But what happens with most organizations is the very success that fun brings with it means that it gets pushed into this third stage, the stage I call whitewater. And whitewater is basically the stage at which the organization, the senior leadership of the organization, has a really binary fundamental choice to make, which is, do they want to stay as a small niche organization? Do I want to just be a church that ministers in this one geographical area, maybe just with 1 or 2 ministries? Do I want to keep one coffee shop, maybe 2, maybe even 3? Or do I want to be a regional or national or global player? If you want to be able to do the latter, if you really want to scale, then you've got to put systems and processes in place. And that's what whitewater is all about. First of all, recognizing that, and then secondly, doing it, which is not as easy as it sounds.
I was going to say, I was about to say easier than done, right? Yeah.
A very glib statement, right?
Yep.
And if we're successful in that, we get to predictable success. I'm sure we'll come back and talk about the barriers in doing that. And predictable success is essentially that stage where you don't just have this ability to do this curve that we see on the life cycle here. We have the ability to do what I call a J curve, which is to really scale the organization. Do the right things, you can stay there indefinitely. That's the one big difference between an organizational life cycle and a human life cycle, is if you do the right stuff, your church can stay in predictable success forever. Your business can stay in predictable success for as long as you keep doing the right things. As I am a public attestation, we haven't yet learned how to stop human aging. We just keep on aging. But the reality is that what happens in almost all organizations is we did a thing that was really painful, put these systems and processes in place, but it really delivered for us. We were able to massively scale. So what do we do whenever we do get something good? My recipe for dessert: have seconds, have more, bring in more systems and processes. And so that's what pushes us down the decline stage on the right hand side here. First stage is treadmill, and that's just a stage most organizations that are in predictable success slide into from time to time. We just get a little over bureaucratic. We just have with too many forms, too many regulations, just too much compliance. That's fairly natural, and if we can recover from it, we get back up into predictable success. But if we don't, what happens is that over time, we eventually begin to like it like this. We lose our challenge function. We slide into this stage I call the big rut. And the big rut is just a long, slow slide into irrelevance. And, in the church world, let me be blunt, you can see that in a lot of the older denominations. Just slow slide into irrelevance. Not all of them, but. And so once you're in the big rut, the difficulty, and it's going to have a big impact on our discussion in a little moment or two. As you see, we're going to talk about the economic impact of the COVID crisis. The problem with being in the big rut is the key distinction between it and treadmill is, in the big rut, we've lost our ability to self-diagnose. We actually like it like this. We don't recognize where we're going, and we quite like how things are. And then ultimately, it might be generations. It can take literally decades and decades for it to happen in both for-profit and not-for-profit. But eventually, we'll hit the stage I call death rattle, when it sort of
Hmm.
looks like, oh, something interesting is happening here, but all that's happening is we're really putting this thing to bed
Sure.
finally, once and for all.
Yeah.
So those are our
Okay.
7 stages, and that's how predictable success shows up in every organization, whether for profit or not for profit.
That's so good. And for those of you that might be listening on the podcast, we're going to do our best to try to help describe this as we're talking about it, but you can go to the website and see all the slides and see the video of this as well. So we're going to have both formats of this. And I would encourage you, like if you're listening on the podcast, actually to jump in on the website and check out this episode. This is one of the few podcast episodes that we actually also do. We're doing a video version of, really for this reason, because I really wanted you to see some of what Les is describing. And Les, I think one of the reasons why I reacted so much to predictable success when I first learned of it is, first of all, the language is so memorable. You know, the early struggle, we all, you know, if you've been a part of a startup organization, whether church or business, which I've done both, and that early struggle stage, I mean, that is visceral. That is exactly what it feels like. And then the fun stage is it is pure fun. Like you're just enjoying the crazy rapid growth. And then whitewater again, but every one of them is so distinct. And I think that's what just helps us all kind of grasp the language of this. And it really gives us handles for what is happening. I think one of the things that I connect with so much, and when I'm working with some of my clients, is just okay, these stages are normal, but it's what we do in them and how we react to them that really impacts the direction we're going to continue to go. And I would love to, you know, we're in coronavirus pandemic, which is upending everything many of us know. I think a lot of us have not, well, I don't think any of us have led through something like this. As I recall, I think you've led through, did you say it's something like 7 recessions between UK and US?
Through a remarkable piece of choreography, because of the fact that I spent the first part of my career in the UK. I was going, obviously, tracking through their cycles, and so I went through 4 out there, and then when I moved out here, I've since been through 3: the first .com bust in the early aughties, and then the course of 2008 to 2012, depending on how you gauge it, the Great Recession, as I think most people are calling it, and then this event now. But of all 7, this is something unique. The other 6 were all variations of each other and different in intensity. And this, you know, in many senses is the same thing, but it's just that the difference of intensity is so huge, that I think it's going to have a highly different, and I think we've all come to realize, a much deeper medium and long-term impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, talk a little bit about, in these times of crisis, recession, you know, significant impact on us like this. What, you know, as we're thinking about the model and those stages of organizational life, what's changed? What do we need to be aware of? What's going on that we need to wrap our heads around as related to the stage of our organization's life?
Sure. Let me share my screen again and talk us through what the model tells us happens during this time. And as I've seen over the years, it's proved itself out over and over again. Essentially, what occurs whenever we hit an economic headwind for any reason, in fact, just to broaden this out for a second or two, this impact happens. I don't know if some of our listeners will maybe during their studies have come across something called a PESTLE analysis, STLE. And PESTLE is an acronym, obviously, and it's an acronym standing for the areas where organizations can most be impacted. So political, economic, social, technological, legislative, environmental. That's what the PESTLE is. Any massive change has an impact that's like a headwind on the life cycle. And I'll explain precisely what that means in a moment. And one of the things I think we've got to be aware of is that almost every one of those 7 potential headwinds are included in what we're currently in. I mean, everything politically, economically, socially, technologically, legislatively, environmental, it's all coming down. And that's one of the reasons why this is such a major push. And so classically what happens at a time like this is we've got this headwind, And so what matters is where you were, where your church or your business was on this life cycle just before it hit. Now, at the time we're recording this,
Mm-hmm.
it was a laughable 6 to 8 weeks away. I mean, it's like forever. It
Right,
feels like
right.
another era. But
Yeah.
whenever you go to take that quiz at lifecyclequiz.com, don't answer it where you are now. Answer it as to where you were just before this hit, because where you
Okay.
were is going to decide what happens to you. Because what happens with a headwind, it drives you further down either side of the life cycle that you were on.
Okay.
So if you're on the growth side, you're going to get pushed down. Say we have our church here, Lake Whitewater, we hit what we hit. You go typically and classically at a time of economic headwind like this, you get pushed back to where you were. And many of our listeners will remember that and be familiar with it happening in the 2008 recession, that basically you've got to retreat, you've got to retract, you get pushed backwards, you become smaller. That, maybe you just hired your first HR person, or you put
Mm-hmm.
together a team to do culture development. That's all got to go because we're hunkering down, rolling, and going with the flow here. And on the other side, if you were in early treadmill, you just peaked past predictable success, then you're going to get pushed further down this side. You're going to get pushed towards death rattle.
Wow.
And the distinction here, and it's the same thing happening on either side, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're getting pushed down,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a real important distinction here. If you're getting pushed down on the growth side, you're getting pushed back towards familiar territory.
Right, right.
You're getting pushed back into somewhere you were before. So
Yeah.
it's not as if you look around and you think, what world is this? You're
Mm-hmm.
looking around saying, oh,
We have
was, X years ago or whatever it is. But it's livable with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put a caveat to that in a second or two. If you're on the other side, however, and you're getting pushed further down the decline stage, you're getting pushed towards death rattle. You're
Right.
getting pushed towards the show being over.
Yeah.
And so, that being so, one of the things that we've got to look at is, what does that mean in this current climate?
Right.
And one distinction I would make is that in the previous recessions that I've worked with, one of the sort of saving graces, if I can just take us back here for a moment, is that getting pushed back on the growth side, if you were anywhere up near here,
Mm-hmm.
you could come back into fun.
Right.
One of the things that I'm really conscious of is, because of the scale of what we're talking about here, you could in fact get pushed back so far, even on the growth side, that you get pushed back and out of extinction,
Sure.
out of existence. You get
Yeah.
pushed back into early struggle,
Yep.
and even so far into there that you lose your market entirely.
Right.
And so that's going to have a ramification in a second or two, which I'll expand on. But essentially, there are two strategies here, and one is if you're on the growth side, if you were in Fan or Whitewater, so long as you're clear that your market will be there when we all lift our head up,
Right.
then you should flex with this and roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
Just retreat back, accept that you're going to have to get leaner, accept that you're going to have to retrace your steps, that it's going to be painful. You're going to be letting people go, but obviously you want to minimize that, work with it as much as possible. But if you're in one of those areas where the market may just not come back the way it was before ever,
Right.
then you've got to be very careful, because you could get pushed back so far that you end up not having a business, in which case you've got to do what I'm about to talk about in a second or so. So if you had, for example, I'm going to make up something here that's a little ridiculous, but it'll prove the point. Cruise liners are, I think, going to face a very difficult decade. If the market ever comes back, it'll take a long time to come back. I just don't think that people behaviorally are going to you know, as soon as everybody says you can jump on the cruise ships again, people aren't just going to be jumping on cruise ships.
Right.
If you were a small, I've been looking for a long time. I've been thinking of doing a trip down Vietnam and Laos in a small little ship, and privately run organization. There's no point them hunkering down. They're going to have to do something completely different, which I'll talk about in a minute or two. Okay. But if you're just, you know, you've got your coffee shops, you know, you run a church, you're just a normal organization, you're on the growth side, take it, roll, accept it, and let's regroup and come back in. On the other hand, if you were on the decline stage, you cannot go with the flow here. You can't let the economic pressure push you where it's pushing you, because it's going to push you down towards excuse me, extinction. You've got to resist. You've got to fight back and not let this happen. And what that means in the middle of a series of blog posts and videos about this on my website, it basically means the need to innovate. If you're in the airline industry right now, you have to innovate. Everybody who's been running worship services knows in the last 8 weeks, everybody's been innovating like crazy. We might talk a little bit about the difference between innovating and pivoting, but the point is you have to innovate. You've got to resist. So those are the two sort of standard responses that I would say for 80% of people. You just find out where you were and do each of those. But I do want to make the point that, and this is probably the toughest part of this message for me to share, that if you're in either of these two first or last stages before this hit, you're not going to make it. It's a horrible thing for me to say. And of course, there are going to be a few exceptions on the early struggle side. There are some businesses just going to be taken. If you just started a business making personal protective equipment for the hospital industry, you know, 2 months ago, lucky you, and you know, wonderful, and that's great. But for the vast majority of organizations who are in either the first stage or the last stage, early struggle or death rattle, the impact of this blow, this headwind is so high that you're not going to do it. What that means in death struggle is you got to find a way to just accept that, you know, this was dying anyway. I mean, I'll give you a tiny little example. There's a wonderful men barber shop. I can go there now. 3 blocks from my Washington, D.C. apartment. Those 3 old guys who serviced probably 25 of us old guys. We wandered in and got our. They were going. They're not opening up again. They're just not going to open up again. They were in death rattle, just seeing it out, and that was fine. They're not going to open up again. If you had just started something, and you just started your first coffee shop, you got to press pause. You got to find a way to press pause. Don't try to fight this right now. The headwind is too high.
Yeah, I have
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have a friend and that they were just starting an organization, and, you know, so of course I check in with them, you know, right at the beginning of all of this about 4 or 6 weeks ago. And she said, yeah, we're just hitting pause. You know, it's not the right time to try to ramp this up and launch this right now. We're just going to hit pause. And curious, as you were talking, I'm, you know, in just thinking of where people are, which stage they're in, and then how this headwind is impacting them. Thinking a lot about a number of the churches that I work with or have connections with, and many of them that were on the fast growth trajectory, you know, probably in whitewater stage, and, you know, trying to deal with the complexity of scaling and so forth. And a number of them are doing great because they've gone back to fun, and so they're seeing all kinds of momentum in the new, innovative, online only, but yet they're going back to some of the principles that they knew in early struggle, where it was, you know, connecting with people one-to-one. You know, they're going back to doing like phone calls to every person that's in their database, and like very like things that I would associate with kind of early struggle, fun stage of like that connect with individuals. And, you know, they've been in whitewater trying to really move to scaling. And then they've been able to go back to some things that were instinctive to them in the early days of their organization's life, especially in churches. Does that kind of give an example of what?
It's a great example, and it's you know, it's intuitively right. Most people aren't sitting looking at their organizations and using predictable success terminology. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, once I mention the words, they say that's exactly what we're doing. But their instinct is 100% right, because if you're in whitewater and pushing ahead and back in, pre-COVID era, those days ago, it's an all-consuming task. You've got to get it done. You've got to get those systems and processes in place, and the systems and processes that are dictated for you to be putting in place are those that are going to allow you to scale into the market. Well, the market has completely been ripped apart.
Sure.
So the actual systems and processes that you're going to need may well end up being very different. So it's important to stop. I mean, I've been talking to my clients in whitewater, and that's what I've been saying to them is do not try to push through into predictable success at this point, because you're working off of the wrong treasure map. It's not there anymore.
Right.
It's not in that market as you thought it was. Let
Right.
this all settle down, go back into fun, and let's come back and take another run at it. So 100% in agreement with that.
That's great. That's great. You were talking there about the innovation piece, and when we're working with clients pre-COVID on predictable success, one of the things we lead folks through is the Scalability Matrix, which has 13 different imperatives, and depending on where you are, and a number of different things, and defines which one of those imperatives are important for your organization to work at. And innovation is one of those, but it's usually one we get to a little bit later when we're coaching and working with organizations. But as I'm hearing you, innovation is kind of the key imperative for most of us in this season. Is that right?
Absolutely. And, the reason is that the landscape is going to be so different permanently as a result of this. I would say semi-permanently, definitely. And many changes are going to be permanent. And I'm not setting myself up as a crystal ball reader and suggesting I know what those all are, but we can see what some of them are. That I think on a simple basis, the stuff that we're doing. We were talking a while back, you and I, about how we just talk about Zooming now. That's the way it is. I suspect the days of the one meeting business trip are gone.
Right.
I'm not going to get in a plane and go to St. Louis to see somebody for one visit. That's not going to happen anymore. It's so much stuff has accelerated us towards all of this. Anyway, the landscape will have changed. I don't believe that we're going to have just a flip back to where we were. Behaviors are going to change considerably. And in order to remain relevant into that, we have to change towards that.
Sure.
And one of the things I've been thinking about and writing about and coaching a lot on at the moment is we've seen and are in the middle of a lot of pivoting. That word is just everywhere.
Everywhere.
Pivot. Right?
Yeah.
So you got to pivot from, if you're a restaurant owner, you got to pivot from in-house dining to takeaway and delivery. If you're a church, you got to pivot from in-building worship to virtual worship. Pivoting is not innovation. That's what's worrying me at the moment. Pivoting is not innovation.
I really want you to talk about the distinction between this, because this is an aha, I think, for many of us.
Well, it's really important to do. Pivoting is important, but it's part of triage. It's part of the short term, getting your breath, responding immediately to what's going on, buying some time, staying in your market, whether for profit or not for profit.
Right.
But if all you do is pivot and you stop at that point, then when things change again, and they won't be changing like back to what they were, they'll change to something else, it'll evolve, you'll be pivoting, you'll have to pivot again into there. And it was really taken by a quote that's very well known, has been used in many contexts over the time. It's more relevant now than ever. It's a guy called Bobby Orr, who was a fantastic ice hockey player and just incredible degree of success. And he said, the reason for my success is I skate to where the puck is going to be. And you just think about that.
Yep.
I skate to where the puck, whereas everybody else is waiting for the puck to come to them. And innovating is skating to where the puck is going to be. And I'll give you, a real simple, somewhat lazy example, but it's a good example anyway. I remember in the first wash through of the gig economy, which happened in the early 80s, one of the industries that really benefited was the taxi industry, because there were a lot of independent workers and they had to go to places, instead of somebody being in an office and doing a thing. There was this rise of people who were going out with portfolio jobs, and so taxi business boomed. And back then, it was yellow top taxis. That's
Right.
how you got a taxi. And they pivoted into that market very strongly. And the way they pivoted was they put their prices up and dropped their service levels.
Uh-huh.
That was a bit, so, oh, everybody wants us, so let's do that.
Yep.
Uber and Lyft come in and they innovated. They skated
Yeah.
to where the puck was going to be. They used, no, there's a whole backstory and subsequent story and
Right.
backlash stories and all the rest of it, but you can't take it away
Perfect
from them.
example. Yeah.
They innovated to where the puck was going to be
That's
and
good.
owned that industry. So there's a huge difference between pivoting and innovating. And if you haven't pivoted yet, there's an obvious pivot to be made, make it.
Right.
But if you've made a pivot, and especially if it's working for you and things aren't too bad, get nervous because it's going to shift again.
Right.
And you need to be skating to where the puck is going to be.
That's good. That's good. Okay. So what does it look like? What do we as leaders need to do differently to, as we're talking about this? What needs to change with us as we're thinking about this?
Real good question. Let me just share my screen again and show you. I'm going to give you. So the first key factor that we talked about is where were you as an organization on the life cycle before this all hit? I'm going to give you a second factor that's going to massively impact how you respond, and hopefully folks will get some benefit out of this. Let me pull up here. So this is a little busy to start with, so let me just break it down. We're looking at 4 key leadership styles that exist in every organization. This is an integral part of the predictable success model. And just like the 7 stages, no academics were used or harmed in this development of this profile. This just happens to be the way it is. This is what just what is. All I've done is put names around this stuff. Yeah. And so what happens is organizations start with a visionary. It doesn't matter what organization you look at, the biggest for-profit, the oldest church you can think of, there was always somebody somewhere who started that thing. Yeah. Occasionally there's 2-3 people in a founding startup team, but even then there's usually one of them that's the visionary and had the real idea. Those visionaries are 30,000 feet, high risk takers, prepared to do something that's got an 80% chance of failure. An entrepreneur is often being defined as somebody who'll give up working 40 hours a week for somebody else to work 80 hours a week for themselves. That's the classic visionary, resilient, loves to talk, to think, big picture, gets bored with detail. And so what they do, any visionary who, again, may not have used this phrase before, but they will inherently, certainly all the ones who lead the organizations that are in the 20% that succeed, they will intuitively know their own weaknesses, which is they get bored with detail and they need somebody who's going to go implement that boring detail for them. And so they link up with someone that I call the operator. Right. And the operator is just, we all know operators, they just would go through breeze block walls to get things done. They're a force of nature. You can't hold them back, but it's rarely pretty, but they're not stopping to sand anybody's feathers down or make anybody feel okay. It's like, just get out of my, what do you mean sitting eating? I have stuff to do. Right. A visionary conducting a team of operators is essentially how we grow in those first 2 early stages, early struggle and fun. You remember from the life cycle. Yeah. So we have a visionary, and then typically they might get called leaders in the organization, but the reality is these operators are enablers. They're water carriers. They're people who make the visionary's vision work. And that works really well. And they love that. The visionary loves that. And that's how you grow rapidly early on. And that's how it should be. And then what happens is we hit the whitewater stage. And after the visionary and operators trying to grapple with this themselves, it's typically the first point at which they recognize the need for this third style, which I call the processor style. And that's the person with the left brain, the green eye shades, low risk, risk averse, very linear, very detailed, all about doing it right and documenting. And because that's what you need. You need people to bring in systems and processes. And so when whitewater, this style comes in, and that in itself brings a need for this fourth style, which I call the synergist style. And the reason for that is that visionaries and operators together get on perfectly well and can finish each other's sentences. For reasons we don't have time to go into right now, when the processor arrives, it forms an unstable triangle. The visionary operator processor triangle doesn't gel the way it should do. And so in order to succeed and to get through that, we need the team to develop this fourth style, which is a learned style, unlike the others. Anybody can become a synergist. And in the best of teams, everybody does. They learn how to sort of step into this overdrive, this mindset that a synergist essentially says, look, what's best for the organization as a whole? Rather than me needing to scratch my visionary itch or my processor itch or my operator itch, what's best for us as an organization as a whole? And so it's really important to understand the need for, the choreography with which those styles arrive. And here's what I want to use those. And by the way, as before, you can go take your quiz. I take your styles quiz here, synergistquiz.com. Take you about 5 minutes, and it'll pop up. What most of us are a combination of these. We have like a profile, and we're not just one of them. And you can see what yours is. But I want to show you importantly what you need, depending on where you're at with the growth curve. If you're up here in the northwest quadrant that we were talking about before, in other words, if just before this hit, you were on the growth side, you need visionaries and operators. And I'm going to say something really, really painful here. I feel awful saying it, and it makes me sound like a terrible mercenary. I'm going to say it anyway. If you have to let people go, the people you want to let go are the processors and synergists, because they don't have a role in keeping you alive. In the fun growth side, it's visionaries and operators. You need the visionary innovating, seeing what needs to be happening, and operators who are out there making it happen. Right. So if you just brought your accounting in-house, if you just brought your HR, if you just had your first HR department, if you just brought in somebody who's a director of culture, which is typically a synergist role, those are typically going to be the ones that you're going to have to let go, because they don't. Those are roles that you need in late whitewater and predictable success, and they will actually prevent you from recovering, because they'll slow you down. You need to get back to being nimble, the way you were talking about your colleague and client and friend.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. So that instinct to go back to the innovate, fresh ideas, and then make it happen is what we need if we're in that side of the life cycle.
So it's easy to see from a for-profit perspective, but you can translate this easily into the church world. If I'm manufacturing some product or delivering some service, you want to keep the visionary who's got the vision, and then essentially your best salespeople and your core deliverers. That's what you want to get back to, and then build up from there. And you're going to want to move to this type of, strip down your org chart, and you're going to get back to a very simple model. So what I call the sun and the stars, and it's essentially the visionary orchestrating a series of big dog operators. These are people who've got high degree of autonomy and just make stuff happen, and keep you nimble and flexible. And obviously I'm giving you the very tip of a large iceberg here, but that's what you need if you're there in the northwest quadrant. On the other hand, if you're here, you were in treadmill just before this hit, and you recognize that we got a bit sluggish, we got a bit old, we got a bit flabby, we weren't, we lost our energy and our nimbleness. If you're going to make it back here, you need all four. Because you're trying to get back into predictable success at the apex here, and that's the DNA of the team in predictable success. And what that probably means is that you're going to have to add back in visionary and operators, because those are the ones who tend to begin to be squeezed out when you're declining. And think about this. The thing you need to do more than anything else is innovate. Of all of the styles, it's the visionary that innovates. And so if you've not had a challenge function for some time, if everything's been just sort of, let's just rinse, repeat. If you try to recover from this with that same team, you're going to be in deep trouble. So if I was a church that was creaky and previously, it was all a bit samey, and you felt you'd lost your flair, I'd be looking around and saying, whose voice did we stop hearing? Where's our visionary gone? And if you don't have one, now is a good time to go partner with a younger, more vibrant church that has got a visionary.
That's a great,
because you desperately need this. You need to bring it into the organization. So that's
good.
That's the second tool, if I can put it that way, that is good for folks to bear in mind. So the first one was, if you recall, make sure you know where you were in the life cycle, and then that should help you understand whether you need to hunker down, go back, retreat a little bit on the growth side, or push like crazy back towards predictable success, which means innovate.
Right.
And, pivoting is good, but it's not enough. And if you're on the growth side, your core is your visionary and operators. You might have some mini P's to keep you out of jail. That's a good idea.
Right. Yeah.
But outsource as much of that as you can.
Yeah.
And if you're on the decline stage, you're probably looking around saying, where's our visionary? Where's our visionary? And we need a few more operators as well.
Yeah. And what I've noticed this specifically in a lot of the churches that I work with, is that if they've tipped over onto that into the treadmill side, they oftentimes, their visionary might still be in the organization, probably still as a senior pastor, but has some side projects and things that they've started working on. Not always, but because we've built systems and things that they started to get a little bored with, and the machine is just kind of running, like we're kind of doing our thing. And so bringing, and really on both sides, that visionary voice has to stand out again. Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair. And we'll see a number of, this isn't just a church-based thing, it happened in for-profits as well, where the sort of semi-retired founder is going to step back in at this point and say, no, that's we won't make it if we keep doing that.
If we keep doing,
a lot of it's about the degree to which they have stepped away. You can do a step away to an extent, which in normal times is actually healthy and the right thing to do, which is, if you're going to go,
Right.
But
but in something like this,
and they still have some of the vision for it, then that's really important.
That's important. Okay, that's really helpful. How about my next question was going to be how to lead our teams to embrace innovation. Some of this is, we need to be paying attention to these leadership styles and building our team appropriately, correct? And what else would you add? What do we need to be thinking about of how to if our team doesn't have that instinct for innovation, what advice would you give us?
Well, the first thing I would say is I would back up a little bit and say that at the moment, the speed with which things are changing is still very high.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations, a lot of the teams, the senior teams that I'm talking with, I mean, literally now, today, as at the point when we're recording this, are still just emerging out of initial triage or moment.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And have only just, maybe not even finished, but they're maybe towards the end of the beginning of responding. In other words, just done the things that had to be done, maybe had some layoffs, done whatever pivoting needs to be done, and are only now starting to say, okay, where's the puck going to be?
Right.
And so I'd say three things. I'd say, one, if nobody's asking that question, however, whatever terminology you want to use about it, but if nobody's trying to move beyond merely pivoting, then you have a big problem, because that just means something's absent, and you probably need a visionary. You're probably missing, and if you're not the one that's saying it, you need to find somebody who is. So you need to get with somebody somehow in your organization. And we're back to, I just was talking on Thursday last with a guy who has gone out and got his founder to come back.
Wow.
For exactly that reason. So if nobody's asking the question, then that means that's a big issue. You're missing the big V, as I call it, the main visionary in the organization. If, on the other hand, the second alternative is you're saying it and other people aren't responding, then you've got to be a little careful. A lot of folks are just still in shock. They're not. Their initiative antennae aren't back yet, and so I think there's still. This is short-term advice, but it's important. I think there are weeks, maybe months, of being patient with your people and communicating and staying close to them and just, getting them calmed to the point where they can begin to think that way, that, this is, we got to find out where the puck is going to be. So I wouldn't get too jittery if you're not getting a response at the moment.
That's good. Yeah.
The third thing that I would say is, which is the other end of the extreme, if you're getting resolute pushback on change, then you've a retooling issue to do in your team. And that's the hardest in the current environment.
Right.
Some of the most anguishing discussions that I've had with my clients it's only just happened in the last week to 10 days. And I very strongly suspect I'm going to have more and more and more of them over the next couple of weeks, are those folks who are coming to me. I'm typically coaching what I call the most senior executives. So that might be the senior partner, a pastor, a founding pastor. It's the CEO of the business or whatever. And the real tough conversations I'm having are with the folks. So the tough ones are folks that just had to lay people off. That's heart-wrenching. I've had to do it. It's just heart-wrenching, horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
But then there are the folks who have either didn't have to do that or have done it and it's done. And they now realize I have 2, 3, 4, 6 key people. They don't have what I need right now.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
That's
super hard.
Can you believe? I mean, I've been there. It's just awful.
Yeah.
But for those people, if you're listening here, and you just know in your heart that some of the key people that are surrounding you at the moment don't have what it takes for this moment, you need to understand this isn't a moment.
Right.
This is a fundamental change, and you should be looking at some short to medium term ways of finding a home for them and getting the people that you need in, because a lot of organizations will founder because they didn't retool their own leadership abilities in the way that they needed to. It doesn't apply to everybody.
Yeah.
A lot of leadership teams are going to make the changes they need. Hopefully, the tools we talked about today will help with that and get out the other side. But there are some leaders out there who are going to be saying, I am really, really struggling with this because Jesse and Joan and Jose were great.
Yeah.
But they don't have what we need right now.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's, incredibly hard, but I think to some degree we all need to hear that because, as difficult and as challenging as this is, there are some key decisions that we may have to make, again, depending on the circumstances of your organization, but that may be a very real reality for some of the leaders listening.
Well, one of the things that I saw happen a lot in the financial industry in the Great Recession, 2008 to 12, I believe is going to be much more prevalent in all types of organizations, for profit, not for profit. And it's essentially a part of what we were just talking about. What happened back then was in the financial institutions, obviously, they were the ones in the 2008-2012 recession for whom the complete change of the landscape was most obvious. The whole banking world was different before and after in a way that we're all being shook up now. One of the things that happened within those institutions towards the back half of that period was they started to develop basically 2 leadership teams. So there was the legacy leadership group that had been around beforehand, and they were being increasingly allowed to continue to just shepherd legacy stuff out. And then a shadow, unrecognized, not really named group would emerge, who were the forward-thinking future leadership group, who were trying to work out where the puck was going to be. Yeah. And they would take a non-titled, authority-based, so you'd have those same MSE, senior executive, managing through the leadership team that was all of the sort of status quo and maintenance, but would be spending more and more time with a group of 2, 3, 4 people. And then over time, these folks, their role just changed, and this group, the future leadership team, became the actual leadership team. Okay. And that's one way to approach it.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Les, this has been so good and so helpful. Lots to give us, lots of things for us to think about. Anything else, any last thought that you would leave us with? Maybe things, ways we need to think differently or challenges we need to anticipate just as we try to navigate the next few months and ahead of us?
Just the one thing that I've been sharing with folks, and I occasionally, get into a coaching interaction where, in essence, somebody's being vulnerable and honest and open and saying, I don't know where to start. I'm
Right.
just overwhelmed, and I just would suggest something really simple if you've got any sense of that, and it's useful for anybody to do, which is take 45 minutes to an hour and spend the first 30 minutes or so honing out what the top three presuppositions that underlined everything you did in the pre-COVID world. What
Mm.
were the top three presumptions that you made? And there's a worked example I did with the airline industry on my blog, which if you want to, anybody wants to
We can
dig deep,
link to that.
they
Yeah.
can lead to that. And then you got to sit down and do what's harder, which is to start to define the top three presuppositions that should lead you to where the puck is going to be.
Hmm.
So I'll give a real quick example, if I was going to sound too academic. I went through this with a group of people who serve into the airline industry. And, one of the presumptions in the airline industry was always that people would have to travel in volume, simple as that.
Right.
Well, one of the future presumptions is it's going to be much more discretionary decision. So what does that mean? One of the presumptions in the industry, and this was the participants came up with this, I was just facilitating it, was that there was a clear distinction between shipping people and shipping products, or flying people and flying products.
Right.
You have passenger jets, and one of the assumptions that they came to is that distinction will,
Go
we'll
away.
begin to have a flying experience that's going to be different from us all 400 of us getting into all of the airplane.
Right.
Whatever that might be. Just simple,
Yeah.
basic things like that. What are the
Yeah.
core presuppositions that fueled what you did previously? And what are the presuppositions as best you can tell them? Now that's going to change over time, but get started with your list
Yeah.
and hone it and shape it.
That's really good. That's really good. Awesome. Well, Les, thank you for this conversation. Thanks for your voice and leadership and influence. And I know I'm personally grateful for just your wisdom as we walk through these days. And we will link to both of the quizzes. We'll also make sure we link to both of the books, the Predictable Success book and then the Synergist book. The Synergist book focuses on those 4 leadership styles. And predictablesuccess.com, correct?
That's where
the
everybody can find
website.
it.
That's where we should go. Awesome. Well, Les, thanks again for being here, and just grateful for just your contribution and spending time with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Bye, everybody.